Chapter 186, Terran Mercenary Team. Garen had already made a mental list of the things to buy for his wife. Because he couldn't do anything productive to get closer to her, doing all these over-compulsive preparations made his soul calm down, giving him the necessary stability to function decently despite the impatience. He heard the cloth from Cloth City was the best. It was the most beautiful and the most colorful. He made a mental note to order several bolts of different colors. He also decided to buy cloth from the 2 other cities, especially one from Kilpo, in case the so-called extreme weather veered towards the extreme cold. He would also buy a lot of commoner cloth from Makita City, which seemed closer to linen than any others and would be good to make Althea's everyday clothing. He also needed to find good seamstresses to make the clothing for her. Anyway, Garen was very aware of her size. He made a mental note to ask for different sizes though, as he didn't know if Althea had lost or gained weight during their time apart, hopefully the latter. Fabric or the creation of actual clothing was in no way inexpensive. On average, decent clothing costs a couple of gold per set. However, Garen knew both services were not easily accessible to villagers. Althea would definitely have trouble finding a change of clothing from wherever she was. At the back of his head, he also wondered where to hire someone to wash clothes for her. Other than clothing, there were shoes. The products of the best tanner in town was also quite expensive, but he still made a note to order her enough boots and shoes. He would also ask the tanner to make different types of bags, so Althea had a lot of choices depending on her plans and her mood. He also noted to buy tons of parchment and ink for her from the bookstore. She liked to draw her plants and write detailed notes very much. His wife had a good memory, but she found a bit of extra happiness in recording everything in tangible ways. How torturous it must be to see so many alien plants, but not be able to record them. There were also no hygienic products here, only water and a plant called papra which had a minty aftertaste. The practice was to use these to wash, well, everything. Since there were no other options, he decided to buy a few bags of these as well. His wife was a bit of a clean freak like he was. His poor wife must be suffering and uncomfortable. His heart hurt just thinking about it. Sigh. He couldn't do much for her now, but in a few days he would get her himself and give her the best life possible. Then came her other needs, which were, to her, sometimes even more important, her plants. Hence, how could he forget to buy an important thing, seeds and potions, as big of a variety for both as he could get. At least this time, he wasn't one-upped by that girl Winona when it came to procuring exotic seeds and materials to gift his own wife. Garen reviewed his personal sources of income. So far, he had released 1 source and 1 condiment, to Feral and to Bart, respectively. A conservative amount of about 200 to 50 gold a month could be received from dividends alone. He would dedicate about 100 to the team and its operations. The remaining would be for his personal use. This amount was comforting, and he knew he'd be able to provide a luxurious life for his wife when they met. Furthermore, the team also hunted for a lot of meat, and they had long been able to pay for their own basic expenses. They could exchange the body parts of the monsters for vegetables and fruits they couldn't get themselves. Most interestingly, Jake and Brandon were receiving royalties for their crossbows, meaning somewhere out there, the designs were being reproduced. They couldn't help but think, or hope, rather, that the people using it were Terrans as well. Unfortunately, during the weekly payout, only Troy Prudd and Brenda Smith showed up, which didn't give them a lot of clues. In any case, the current model of the team was relatively self-sufficient and could take on a few more members. Send a hiring notice in the town center. We accept members and soldiers even if they're not elementalists. If they get accepted, not only will they get a monthly allowance of 5 gold, at the least, but their accommodation and food will be taken care of. Gil, who knew this plan, nodded in excitement. Terran Mercenary Team is hiring fighting force and life occupation professionals. Wage 5 gold mo, free meals, 3, and accommodation. Requirements level 10 or above. Pass for 2 rounds of interviews. This notice created a wave within the territory, and within a couple of minutes, it was all most people were talking about. So generous was often asked in disbelief. After all, the average cost of living in towns was about 10 gold per month, and this was mostly for food and shelter. To give 5 whole gold inclusive of food and shelter was very, very generous. With this, we can basically save up a few golds every month. one exclaimed as if he already got the job. There were also many others who were very cynical about the unheard-of name making the announcement. What is this Terran team anyway? It's a new team, I think. I know them, they look professional and their auras are strong, but, he sneered, there was no one above level 20. Almost everyone who heard made a derisive sound. There were also a lot of questioning voices all around the territory. After all, what could a group of people less than level 20 do? On the contrary, such a weak group had so many resources. A pitiful group of level 15s could have so much money, get their own land, and live so comfortably while they, several levels higher, still needed to watch their spending. Tusk. Such a comfortable life. Do they deserve it? The answer was a resounding no. This made a lot of sly brains calculate what they could get out of them, already planning how to get some leaks. Unknowingly, in whatever way or form, the Terran mercenary team had made a name for itself just a few days after its establishment. As for whether this was a good thing or a bad thing, this was something to be decided with time. In any case, the team was working full-time, trying to prepare as best as they could, in hopes of welcoming their loved ones well. While certain men were inspired and hyped up, a certain tall, plain-looking aborigine was the opposite. He had a semi-bald head that made his entire face look even more elongated, which was further emphasized by his deep frown. He dragged his feet along the town's stone pathways, head filled with thoughts of uncertainties. His name was Madon Lu, and he was very depressed. He was now unsure what to do with his life, and he was feeling even a little panicked. A few days ago, he had just been rejected at his final chance in the Chancery of Appointments. He paid a whooping 5 gold for a few slots, but no territory took him in. He could understand this in towns, because hiring them was not cheap. Further, there were better and more experienced options at that level. He wasn't even choosy. For his last run, he was even reduced to accepting villagers, but for some mysterious reason he didn't understand, he was still rejected by the said village. Was that Lord blind? Althea the blind lord. He grabbed his very short black hair in stress, but heaved a sigh to calm himself. Now that he had to wait another month before he could enter the Chancery of Appointments again, he just trudged his feet to go to the town centre, hoping there was a job. He didn't understand. Was it so obvious that he just got the qualifications to be a weapons maker? Obviously, life occupations weren't very common, right? This was the thought that had baffled him for some time, as he blankly looked at the announcement board in a daze. It was a board that occupied nearly an entire wall. It was filled with parchment sheets overlapping with parchment sheets. Some were faded, and some were brand new. The most prominent one was a bounty for a man named Zukuro. His eyes twitched just at the sight of his drawing like his eyes were burned. Legend was that he was so ugly because he was part ogre. No one could confirm this, however, as anyone who got close enough to him was all very dead. Then there were also hiring notices for elementalists, especially wood elementalists, which had nothing to do with him. Moving further to the better-kept part of the board, he saw an announcement about a rich lady looking for her lost family heirloom. It was allegedly a space stone necklace. Madon shook his head, doubting she'd ever get it back if it really was a space stone, which wasn't very likely in the first place. There was also a post announcing the location of the Tournament of Valor, a once-a-century event that all cities participate in, which was scheduled to be held in 5 years in the city of Makita. This also had nothing to do with him. Cities were too far away from him. He couldn't even get hired by a damned village, he thought bitterly. Then he saw the announcement of job openings in a mercenary team. It looked like it was just posted, and he looked at it curiously, not expecting much. But his dazed eyes grew big when he absorbed the contents. 5 gold a month with free food and shelter. There was such a good thing. One must know that they could only get this amount in the Chancery of Appointments. The organization took a commission of 5 gold every month, so pitiful level E's like him could only get the remaining half of the amount. Madon looked closely at the owner of the announcement, not knowing what to expect. Terran mercenary team. He stared at the announcement for a while longer, nodding to himself, remembering their address by heart. What did he have to lose by trying? Later that day, an understandably long line was found in front of the makeshift tent in their new territory. The construction was temporarily stopped, so people could only see one completed building, a full fence, and a few edifices under construction. It was quite bustling and very interesting. Amusingly, there were also a number of women, albeit not as interviewees, but as audiences, who told this group to be so temperamental. Similarly, there were also many men who ogled at Vanessa, who was in charge of note-taking. She enjoyed the stares very much. Too bad the one she wanted to look at her was blind, and never even gave her a glance. Garin did not notice the bitter stare at all, as he watched over the interview process. Right now, there were only about a handful of candidates that interested him. Although there were a lot with strengths past level 15, it was either their attitudes were too haughty or they were too complacent. Garin did not blame them, however. He was the strongest in this group, and he was not even level 20 yet. In a town, this was not enough to lead a mercenary team, especially not one making such noise. But he didn't feel inferior. Most people here took at least a decade to get to level 20. It took them a few months to get close. With hard work and smarts, Garin believed that his team would catch up with the indigenous people here. With this reassuring thought, his attention returned to the ongoing evaluation. At this time, one of the more interesting applicants was being interviewed, and pretty much every soldier around listened to him with apt attention. "My name is Madon Liu. I am a professional weapons maker," he said, and Brandon, a soldier from the Western continent as well as Jake, straightened up their spines. These two men's specialty happened to be weapon making, which was why despite their different nationalities, they were as thick as thieves almost as soon as they landed here. Together, they even patented a crossbow technology and got a C-class shield, something now used by Brandon, the shield wind elementalist. The two of them also triggered the occupation during its development, gaining great insights into weapons production and having preliminary knowledge about this world's driving force, ether, and how it was integrated with the weapons they created. Although Madon didn't notice, the soldiers all brightened at the sight of him. Another weapons maker on the team, still an aborigine one which had more worldly common sense than they had, would definitely be a great addition to the team. The two whipped their heads simultaneously to the captain, eyes begging him to give the guy a ticket in. Garin's lips twitched at the blonde, and the red-headed, quiff-haired men looking at him like they were children. After a pause, he nodded, and the two almost jumped in joy. If Madon knew he was being so appreciated, he would cry. In any case, a weapons maker was definitely a go for them, and when Garin nodded, the two in-house weapon experts relaxed their tense shoulders, looking forward to what they could be learning from this new member of theirs. Other than triggering the occupation, Brandon and Jake already had plenty of designs running around in their heads. It was only lately, when they had ready access to parchment, did they start drawing. They have been trying to create them, and there had been some success. The weapons maker had a special skill that helped in understanding the connections between components, as well as integrating the life force ether into their weapons so they could cause decent damage to monsters outside. This was how a simple bow and arrow from a store could cause the same damage as their top-of-the-line Terran gun. But according to Gordy, different people likely received different knowledge. Both Brandon and Jake had yet to receive another inheritance, and they were definitely eager to peek at one. Maybe having this guy could help them out. Anyway, having another weapons maker on the team would definitely take the weapons team to another level, not to mention those two could learn more and maybe even receive an inheritance. If they had a special confidentiality contract with this guy, he might even be able to assist in the creation of the bespoke weapons Brandon and Jake designed. "I work very hard, and although I have only been promoted to a proper weaponsmith, I was told by my master that I have the talent to become a B-class weaponsmith someday." The soldiers nodded, internally adding another okay note on this guy's head. They went through hundreds of applicants and finally settled with 15 people, 4 women and 11 men. The women were in logistics to assist Eagle, some for the canteen and some for the sewing of uniforms and other clothing. They weren't being sexist, there really were no female warriors at all. The women even received some frowns from many indigenous men because they were getting jobs outside the house. The men, on the other hand, ranged from level 14 to level 21. Garin took in Clade, the level 21, because he felt the seriousness in him. He did not see haughtiness in him at all, despite his higher level. Satisfied with their list, the group began to pack up, thanking everyone for their participation. "What, you didn't choose me?" a bulky man yelled, pointing at one of the soldiers, tone acerbic. I wasn't chosen either, what a scam. You weaklings didn't hire me because you thought I'd defeat all of you, right? The group frowned. It seemed there would always be officious people doing unnecessary things for a sense of existence. We chose them because they would contribute to the team, rather than make it chaotic. It was Garen who stepped out. His low baritone voice echoed across the vicinity. You are proving our decision was right. The men flinched a bit, intimidated by his aura. Then he remembered his level, which was a couple of levels lower than theirs, and they regained confidence. PFFF, says the weakling, if you're so amazing, why don't you? He was not able to finish his sentence, and he saw a large palm over his head. He felt his body losing footing, and he was pulled down to the ground, the back of his head hitting the ground with a bang. Feral Town was one of those towns that did not prohibit fighting, as long as there would be no damage to other people's property and killing. Fights not exceeding 5 minutes were allowed. The two men were shocked by the sudden attack, and Garen quickly turned his center of gravity. He twisted his strong upper body and kicked the other one in the direction of the third. The impact was strong enough to push the third man and lose his footing. He walked towards the imbalanced men, raised his leg, and sent them an axe kick, throwing them face down the dirty soil on his feet. This all happened in the span of 10 seconds. What? What happened? One asked, twitching as he felt his stomach crunch in pain. The trio eventually gathered their senses and went on the defensive, but they realized that the enemy team had already surrounded them, making them pause any further movements. They looked at them in disbelief. This doesn't make any sense, he yelled. How could he be beaten by someone 3 levels lower than him? The other soldiers continued to block their sight, staring down at them, waiting for them to make a move. None of them did. Even if they were taken by surprise, they were still taken down by a man a few levels lower, all 3 of them. How could they deal with the remaining dozen? The men frowned and looked at each other bitterly, red in embarrassment and anger. However, still feeling the pain in their bodies, they didn't have the face to stay. They went away and soon left the sights of the crowd. There was silence in the crowd, who were absorbing what they had just seen. Garen saw this and nodded, standing upright in front of the crowd. As you can see, with us, you can grow stronger beyond your level. His words echoed in the hearts of many, especially those who were already taken in. Strength, the key to survival in this chaotic world. And this team was not only paying them a generous salary, they were also willing to teach them how to get stronger. Was that really possible? A little too good to be true, right? No matter what they thought, Garen remained still and poised, looking at the audience in the eyes. In the next few days, after our small complex is completed, we will also start hiring again. Please look forward to it, he said before turning away without another word. However, these words were enough to spark deeper curiosity among the indigenous people. Lord Jonathan, who was watching in interest not too far away, couldn't help but chuckle a bit. Good guy, he even used the commotion as an advertisement. Feral Town. Garen, Gil, and the others went in, leaving the members assigned with public relations, i.e. social butterflies, like Lewis and Sammy, to answer the questions. Anyway, now that the scary men were gone, a lot of people came closer to satisfy their curiosity. Most prominently, people asked when the next batch of interviews would be. There was no way. Not only were the conditions and benefits extremely attractive, but they could also learn to be stronger than others. Maybe they'd even be able to beat people beyond their level. How amazing was that? It used to be something inconceivable, but they just saw it with their own eyes, still 1 against 3. Would you really teach us your techniques? How much would you charge us? An eager middle-aged man and Lewis smiled amicably in response. There would be no charges, but the skills taught would depend on specialty and position. He said, of course you'll have to sign a bond with us in the town center, tying you to us for a couple of years. The people nodded, as this was common practice amongst commercial and mercenary teams investing in their people. And because they would be invested in, they also asked, do we get equipment? Yes, but the level would depend on your contribution and potential. He said, if you make enough contributions, you may even get exclusive equipment not available in the weapons store. He wasn't lying, their own weapons makers were both very innovative and hardworking. Then there was a young lad looking at him curiously. They seemed to be around the same age. This was the first time I've heard of you though, how come? We are new, just established a few days ago. This time, it was Sammy who answered. What he received were quite a few disbelieving stares. What? Sammy was unfazed, though. The lord of the territory became our business partner, and we got some land in return. Really, that's impressive. Well, our boss is amazing. He said, you may not know this, but our boss is the inventor of feral beef sauce and Roland magic sauce. If you join our team, then your food will have it. This incited a lot of excited murmurs, and you could see the remaining inkling of doubts swept away. Wow. Sure enough, good food fixed everything. Similar questions popped up, and Lewis and the others patiently answered them all. Do you have elementalists? One asked, breaking the plethora of inquiries asked at once. Silence ensued, and they stared at Lewis, waiting for his answer. Although they didn't think he'd answer the affirmative, they were curious if this group would surprise them again. Lewis almost said the truth, but didn't in the end, primarily because it was too unbelievable. People might just think that he was lying. So instead of answering, he simply raised a palm and willed the fire elements around him. Soon a small fireball formed, floating an inch above his finger, its light making the people's eyes bright. It was only as big as a tennis ball, but at least it wasn't the tiny spark from before. This was enough to impress everyone, though, and they looked at him in awe, making him feel a bit smug. In a particularly good mood, he smiled at them. Do you believe me when I say that we do? Yes, sir, thank you for answering. They got an elementalist answering questions. What an honor. In any case, the crowd wouldn't clear up until many minutes later, appearing quite interested in what they had to offer. It could be said that the advertisement was very successful, and their name resounded throughout the territory, just as they wanted. That night, under the illumination of the torches, the commotion finally died down, and the team underwent their usual night training inside the fence. It was supposed to be as per their usual routine of training, with them focusing at least 2 hours before sleeping, hunting their physiques. However, tonight, other than the team members, there were also some audiences that were unfortunately allowed to watch. It was all thanks to her very close connection with the Lord that they had the honor of having his cousin here as an audience. Cassandra looked at the man running uniformly with his men, purple eyes warm and loving. So charming, she said, her eyes wandering from Gil's handsome face to the well-built body that the long-sleeved shirt could not contain. It didn't help that the sweat allowed his lines to show. Cassandra was almost drooling. Fortunately, she was raised as a lady, and all this happened in her head. Well, he's definitely better than that oily ex of yours. Her friend Veronica, who had shamelessly tagged along on this trip, commented beside her. Cassandra rolled her pretty purple eyes. Oslo is not counted. She shivered just by thinking of their kiss. They should have just stayed friends. Gil is definitely my first love. Yes, whatever, the other girl said, her eyes landing on the handsome man with golden hair and blue eyes who was running with a different team from Gil. Brandon is also very good, she said, eyes softening. How handsome. In fact, Garen was the first one to catch her attention, as would be the case with anyone, but she hadn't even entered within 2 meters of him, and she could already feel the entire vicinity freeze. It was very scary. Although she loved beautiful men, she loved her life even more. And at the moment of life and death, Brandon appeared like the light in the darkness, the sweetness amongst the bitterness. Veronica fell in love at first sight. Although it happened often with her, she had a feeling this one would last a long, long time. Oh my, how charming. Veronica was pulled back to the present when Cassie pulled her skin. Ouch, she said, glaring at the other girl, but her peripheral vision caught sight of her future husband, and she forgot to argue. They were sparring now, and it happened that Gil was sparring with Brandon. They just fell in love even more. At this time, the handsome long-haired man and the muscular blonde were facing off in the field, competitive spirit exchanged between them. Their shirts had long been taken off, and they were exchanging weird but charismatic moves that seemed very deadly. Gil seemed to have more focus on kicking attacks, while Brandon was focused more on his fists and punches. It was quite interesting to watch, though they were often distracted by how their muscles flexed and hardened in each hit. It made them forget their upbringing. In any case, they tried to focus on the match itself. Veronica watched Brandon closely, burning all his small movements in her eyes. He always had his arms bent up with his hands clenched. His elbows were also stuck out in a defensive stance, ready to attack and defend at the same time. Gil also had his hands up, but his hands were loose, and much of his attacks were from his lower body. Brandon moved forward and jabbed skillfully, while Gil let out continuous kicks to push him off. Gil immediately countered with a quick spinning kick, and Brandon ducked and countered with a fast jab, immediately followed by a hook. Gil immediately backed away, his tall nose barely avoiding the attack. He then unleashed a rapid succession of kicks, one of which managed to hit Brandon's side. Brandon pushed through and pressed forward, however, closing the distance between them. He delivered a series of body shots, aiming at an opening from the other's kicking stance, and Gil had no choice but to abandon his flurry of attacks in favor of defending. This led to a momentary standstill and respite, where the two just faced off a couple of meters apart, staring each other down. Gil and Brandon were obviously using different techniques, but each one wasn't any less intimidating. Of course, they weren't limited in stance, and they were obviously adopting the other's style, but they had obvious preferences. They were also going so fast that they had to squint their eyes to see properly. Not to mention, neither of the men was using weapons, but the girls were under the impression their attacks would be no less deadly. It was all so very handsome that the two women forgot they were ladies and openly cheered for their men. Of course, compared to the modern fangirls of Terran, they were still quite tame. At most, they only uttered out the men's names louder than they usually did. It was just that people had the comparison point of how they were some days prior. Gil, Cassandra uttered, clapping her hands prettily. The pink-haired Veronica was no less dreamy. Brandon Tilda. On the other side, the soldiers looked at the two fighting men with laughing grins. I thought this place was like the ancient period where women were demure. I was wrong. Oh, they were pretty demure, it's just that our Gil and our Brandon had too much charm. Chai. Gil and Brandon ignored the banters and the women cheering for them. This was especially true for Gil who, unlike Brandon, who looked more clueless than indifferent, actually had a slightly dark expression on his face. Gil raised his feet to hit the other's stomach, using his arms to balance his weight. Immediately, Brandon bent sideways to avoid it, his arms gesturing to hit his face. Gil twisted his body to avoid the jab, and he shifted his center of gravity to give Brandon a high kick. Brandon then shifted to jiu-jitsu and grabbed his feet, trying to grapple him, but Gil was extremely flexible and managed to escape a potential hold. He took advantage of the opponent's imbalance to kick his ankle, pushing him down with the palm of his hands. This made the cheering on the side a little louder. Gil wins, Lewis, the referee, energetically announced with raised arms. This was followed by cheers and hoots, a good part of which from Aborigine women. A certain purple-haired woman in particular had her heart beating so loudly. Although Gil did not look in their direction, her purple eyes were full of him. Her Gil was really amazing, she thought. She must get him. You're amazing, Gil. The beautiful purple-haired woman clapped her hands vigorously, very unlike the lady they first met. A few days ago, she was all demure and ladylike. Look at her now. What he didn't know was that she had bribed Mao and Lewis with food a while back, asking them what Gil wanted. They honestly just told her that because he valued honesty, i.e. with him being so tactless and brutally honest at times, then he must like women who expressed their feelings well. Regardless of whether he knew, Gil pursed his lips as his peripheral vision was inexplicably filled with purple. Gil didn't have much of a good impression about relationships. He himself had been broken up with, though for the understandable reason that he was never present. Not everyone was as good and as understanding as sister-in-law Althea. Still, his eyes couldn't help but stop in the purplehead's direction from time to time. His dark eyes met her colorful ones, expressing so much blunt admiration for him that it was uncomfortable. After a pause, he looked away, decidedly not minding her anymore. "Tusk, so noisy," he said before walking away. From aside, the soldiers watched the drama with interest, looking back and forth the aloof Gil and the beautiful and cute Cassandra. Lewis chewed on whatever fruit he had in space, making a commentary with gusto. "Hey, Gil looks like that bad boy male lead in those dramas my sister likes to watch." "Ah, yeah, my favori. I mean, my mother's favorite was I Made a Deal with the School Bad Boy," Mao said, nodding. Lewis looked at him and nodded. "Oh, I know that, the one with my goddess Junie." "Yes, she was so pretty. I mean, my mother is a fan." The brunette Johnny looked at them and nodded. He was also a fan. Giant, who was beside him, cackled, knowing his friend's hobbies. There was one mission where Johnny almost died, and he made him swear to bury him with his collection of his goddess Junie. Said it was a good sign, since their names sounded so alike, whatever that meant. Anyway, the soldiers continued with their fun, a bit oblivious that the town's lord, the female lead's cousin, had arrived and was listening to their commentary with a complicated expression. 12 kilometers away from Feral Town, a week prior. Artilda, we're finally almost there. The beautiful pink-haired woman looked at her friend in puzzlement. The travel to this place is so troublesome. Why do you even bother? Cassandra didn't answer her immediately. They were currently headed, i.e. running away towards, her cousin's territory. This wasn't a bad idea on its own because, after all, a relative's territory was generally safe. The problem was, the town was many days away from her own. But Cassandra knew she really didn't have a choice. She couldn't stay there anymore. Aren't you tired of staying in the same place? She asked Veronica. I know your territory had already upgraded to town, but it'll take a while for the scenery to change, right? Wouldn't it be more fun to go home after a while and wait to be surprised by the changes? Veronica, of course, knew that this had nothing to do with her, but she knew that her friend was going through something, so she didn't call her out, for now. Fortunately, after a long time, the torturous days of travel were finally reduced to a couple of hours, so her mood was no longer so dour. Some time of traveling later, though, Veronica couldn't stop herself from just asking directly, Come on, Cassie, I'm your best friend, tell me what's going on. At her question, Cassandra stared for a while before sighing in defeat. She combed back her luscious purple hair, looking out the curtains of the carriage. Do you think 30 is old? No, why? Vanessa asked, looking up and down at her friend. Are you talking about our age? Cassandra nodded. 30, we're practically adolescents. Then does it make sense my parents are pushing me to get married already? Veronica pursed her lips at this question, wondering what to say. In the end, she answered truthfully, Well, you're the only child and a woman, so. Cassandra sighed at her misfortune. In fact, she wasn't really an only child. Her father had plenty of mistresses, but her mother's family was too strong, and there was no way her father would let an illegitimate son take over. That left one option, a grandson. That meant her giving birth as soon as possible. Cassandra frowned, rubbing her temple. She knew this, of course, but she didn't want to believe her whole life was planned so strictly that she didn't even have a choice on who to wed and when to do so. That was the rest of her whole life, she was so young. However, she didn't have the time to mope for too long as the whole carriage soon shook wildly before abruptly stopping. Not far away, they heard one of the guards yell out, A mob. What? Veronica yelled and her maid opened the curtain for her. There were scores and scores of mobs around them, and their guards dutifully guarded their carriage. Unsurprisingly, the beasts that pulled their carriages stayed still, neither helping nor joining the mob, as always. Veronica paled a bit, but then she looked closer at the fight outside. They're not even level 10, she said, but Cassandra shook her head. You forget we only brought a few guards with us, she said. Even they would get in trouble with such a large mob. And although unlikely, what if the mob managed to trigger our mount? Before she even finished her sentence, though, the beast carriage shook wildly, and it lurched forward so quickly that the 4 girls inside fell down their chairs. Flop! Kaya Tilda. Misses, the guards yelled, but they were being mobbed by dozens of monsters each. Although they were 10 levels stronger, it was difficult for them to fight such a large mob. Cassandra, Veronica, and their maids struggled to get back at their seats and hold on to them for dear life. One of the maids yelled at the driver, but no answer came. He was probably dead, and their hearts dropped at the thought. Anyway, one of the risks of a beast carriage was that the monster could get confused by the mob. Although unlikely to attack its owners, their orders may fall on deaf ears, as was the current case. They continued on forward, moving wildly, and they could feel the carriage hitting tree after tree. Her maid covered her mouth and tried to stop herself from vomiting, and everyone else was extremely dizzy. They wouldn't be far from puking themselves. Then a splatter outside was heard, and the carriage stopped abruptly. The momentum was so sudden that the carriage went off balance. Unexpectedly, the door opened, and the 4 of them were pulled out. Her head hit a hard chest, and she looked up, meeting one of the most handsome faces she had encountered. Thank you. HM, was all he said, letting her go and focusing on the mob at hand. He actually let her fall down to the ground, but she didn't mind. Her eyes unconsciously just followed his movements. He was extremely dashing, and she watched in awe as he manipulated two elements, fire and earth, skillfully combining them into one attack, which melted every monster that it touched. He was obviously lower in level than her and the guards, but he looked so much stronger. She watched him fight, purple eyes ingraining his image, and deeper in her heart. "Thank you," she said, demurely approaching him and exuding all the grace she learned growing up. He only stared at her for a second before nodding without any emotion. He then turned to the head guard. "Can we get a few carcasses? It's lunchtime." "AR, of course," the guard said, and the handsome man gave a curt thanks before taking a few monsters with his team. Not once did he look in her direction again. This was the first time she was saved so gallantly by a man who had no lust for her, her wealth, or her position. Inexplicably, her heart beat faster. A week prior, after the monsters had been cleared up, Cassandra's group decided to rest near their rescuers, who were then very skillfully making a campfire. Veronica couldn't help but look at the handsome leader of the group. She heard that Garen was his name. She combed her beautiful pink hair and approached the man, who was then observing how his team handled their meat, but she hadn't even felt close when her body shivered, both in coldness and fear. Unconsciously, she lost her balance and fell on her buttocks smack on the ground. She made so much noise that everyone turned their head to her. Her face blushed, as pink as her hair, as she sensed the many stares directed in her direction. Most of the soldiers lacked the usual empathy for a woman, and her guards were relatively far, so she had to endure several grueling seconds of humiliation, sitting on the ground, until they got to her. Or so she thought. "Are you all right?" a gentle voice asked, and she tilted her head to be met with gorgeous blue eyes and blonde locks that shone with the sun. Yes," she mumbled, though her eyes had metaphorical hearts in them by now. She took his hand and he helped her out, though he let go immediately and joined his friends to eat their barbecue. It was like there was no interaction at all just a few seconds prior. Later. On the other hand, Cassandra wasn't getting much luck with her own attempts for a connection either. She approached Gil, who was cleaning up his weapon. She stopped just a meter away from him, and he lifted his head to look at her with an eyebrow raised in puzzlement. "May I know how we could thank this, sir?" she asked. "I mean, you did save our lives." Gil looked at her weirdly. "We killed them for the meat." Later. The man no longer bothered with her and also joined the campfire, completely ignoring her. The two women looked at each other with weird expressions as they just watched the men and their maids fix their carriage and recapture the beast. Fortunately, they had spare whistles, so they managed to regain control of the things. The two groups no longer had any further interactions until a delicious whiff reached their side, and they couldn't help but turn to the source. They saw the group eating the meat hungrily, looking very satisfied, and they couldn't help but drool. "Can you buy some from them?" Veronica asked, though she dared not approach for now, for fear of embarrassing herself again. They then asked their guards to buy as much as they could, not minding the amount they charged. In the end, they bought a couple of sticks for about 12 gold, a bit expensive, but the aroma was killing their stomachs. Then they took a bite, and they felt they'd been brought to Elvendale. No wonder they were so ignored. If it was for food so delicious, they could ignore everything too. At this thought, the women found themselves feeling better. They were so engrossed that they didn't notice that the other group had already packed up and went ahead. It was too late to notice, and they were already several meters away when it dawned on them. The girls couldn't help but look in their direction wistfully. "Where do you think they are heading?" Cassandra asked her guard, who analyzed the direction the group was moving towards. "It's in the direction of our destination, miss," the man said, smiling occasionally as he chewed on the barbecue. Cassandra's purple eyes brightened at his answer. So they were going to Feral Town, then. Goodness elves, it must be destiny, then. Later, she would meet members of their team, and she would treat them a meal, gaining information that Gil was likely to like honest and forward women. It was hard and shameful at first, but then she found a different sort of freedom from just expressing herself as she wanted. She was far from her parents anyway. She never returned to how she was, and, indirectly or not, a lot of this feeling of liberation was associated with Gil and her affection for him. It just made her like him more. Feral Town, present. Cassandra was used to Gil ignoring her, so she didn't mind him not answering her question. Who would have thought she'd be willing to be so humble? Back in her town, she was basically a princess. No one would dare to do this. Similarly, no one would look beyond her beauty and status and just see her. She didn't know why, but she felt Gil would. All her actions, though, were being observed by two people not too far away. Jonathan sighed, not knowing what he was thinking, while Bart looked at everything the Terrans built with a complicated expression. Bart was also one of the visiting personnel at this time. He just happened to have business in the area and decided to check up on this quickly growing partner of his. He was quite surprised by what they achieved in the time they were apart. First, not every team could get a piece of land for themselves. Sure, the Source made a lot of money, but Jonathan was not someone who would give a piece of his territory to others just because of it. Not to mention, it was to a team who seemed to have a subtle conflict with their own subsidiary village. Then he saw how close the princesses of Geronia and Hubble towns were to the team. It was even to the point that they let go of much of their expected ladylike restraints to openly cheer for men. In his heart, it just ended up solidifying the team's background even more. He turned to Jonathan, who was also intensely watching the soldiers train. "You seem to see a lot of potential with this team." Jonathan raised his sharp eyebrows. "Aren't you the same?" he said. "A team filled with elementalists, rising over several levels within a few months. There must be something special about this team." Bart didn't speak and continued to observe the spar. It was true, of course, and their decision to make friends proved wise every day. They really got a lot of money. Clearing his throat, he decided to observe this new base of theirs. His black eyes shifted to look around this new territory they had been building with such grandeur. It was large with a number of buildings. He also didn't expect such attention to the greeneries either. Not far from the sparring area, there were also a lot of contraptions the team called obstacle courses and other unknown mechanisms he didn't understand. To be honest, Bart was a little shocked at the novel training methods. But from what he was seeing, these things and methods worked. After all, he could see its effects on them. He could remember this team who was obviously much lower in level than his, but the killing rate was not much inferior. Could this be their secret? He had always been surprised at the rate of growth of these guys. It was just that their sudden increase in enthusiasm to fight and hunt was beyond him. He didn't even know people could be more passionate than how they already were. After all, as far as he knew, if people leveled up, their physiques also improved. No one really bothered with this type of training. Not only did they go out of their way to hunt for mobs for most of the day, but when they went back to the base, they would still do some training. He heard from their staff that this was done every single day without fail. He thought that they had been working hard enough before, but after that fog, they began to train beyond their limits. Why'd they suddenly become so aggressive? It was as if they were chasing a certain high goal and failure was absolutely not an option, that if they didn't reach a certain threshold of strength, they would die. He recalled the change that happened after that fog, coupled with some of the rumors he had been hearing lately, and he couldn't help but look deeper at Garen and the others even more deeply than before. Bart had an inexplicable feeling that this was the exordium of something big. 12 days of protection period. Althea village. After much ado, the mighty team of 131 people, led by Drake, finally arrived at the vicinity of Althea village. Because most of the people were injured, the pace of travel was very slow. It was already daybreak the next day when Althea and the team returned. The newcomers stared blankly at the tall walls of stone and sentries, intimidating from the outside, but stability-inducing from the inside. "Our level 2 village is so powerful." "I don't know, but it should be very expensive." "Yes, the previous lord asked us to give shares to build a wooden fence. At the time, he looked like he was planning on scraping everyone's wallets." "The people here must be seriously rich, then." As the people chatted, some guards had already excused themselves according to Althea's instructions, for them to get people to help with the injured as soon as possible. Soon, the large group went past the territory line. "Welcome to Althea Village, LV2. Please pay 5 copper coins as entry fee. To become a resident, kindly stop by the village center for a free registration. Please read the rules and regulations below." Ansel's eyebrows rose. He abruptly turned his head to look at Althea, eyes sparkling with inquiry. "Althea. Althea saw this and gave him a mysterious smile instead of answering. They've been family for so many years, how could he not know what this meant? Their exchange was subtle and went unnoticed. Althea even shrugged it off and shifted her attention on the refugees a moment later. Ansel, on the other hand, was gaping at her the whole time, trying to keep himself from exploding. Altera was definitely that Altera. He was related to the Lord, how awesome was that? While Ansel was immersed in the wonderful idea of being directly related to the Lord, the other people were discussing a different part of the welcoming sentence. They looked at each other shocked. 5 copper, so cheap, one asked, eyebrows raised all the way up, wondering if he just wasn't seeing another zero in the end. So good, one asked, a little cynical. Maybe the purchase inside would be sky high. Goodness, I hope not. We could get resources to eat for such a low amount. This amount is almost free, right? Another one exclaimed, already reading the rules and regulations. Even if it was limited, the amount was more than enough for a person. In their previous territory, everything was charged high. The only things they could gather for free were loose stones and twigs, to be sold to the territory at low prices. Of course, they didn't think it was unfair, because at least they could gather resources within the safety of the walls, but no comparison, no harm. There's water, another one voiced out, disbelieving. So cheap. Could they finally take a bath? They couldn't use the water from the restaurant gruel as bath water, right? Then someone brought out a concern. We are also required to fight, he asked, shaking, still remembering the terror of the previous beast tide. The air was stagnant and they looked at the guards, who were unfazed. Well, if you want a contribution point, you can fight. Don't worry, the territory has a lot of people vying for it. Everyone could contribute in their own way during wars, not just fighting. What's a contribution point? Another one asked, recalling that he had indeed read it in the rules. Followed by another question and another. The guards who were with them answered patiently, but inside they were feeling extremely proud of their territory. Even without comparison, they knew their territory was amazing. But with all these refugees telling them the situation outside, their liking and loyalty to the territory had long formed to love and obsessive pride. CPs, contribution points, are points you get if you contribute to the territory one way or another. The best way was to contribute to the territory fights, but people with jobs judged by the territory to help its growth would also get contribution points. I hear private business owners could also apply to pay their people these points, in lieu of copper. There were dozens of chatters around the crowd. It seemed that the rules alone were plenty enough to talk about for hours. They entered the massive gates with bated breath, inevitably even more excited than before. Inside, they found themselves on a peculiar but beautiful wide road in the middle of a rich forest. The forest was majestic, which was weird because obviously the forest outside was the same as that inside, the power of contrast, perhaps. There were also trees in the middle of the avenue and along the sidewalks, indicating the Lord here had foresight and was set to follow his or her plans. And these plans made them even more optimistic. The Lord here is very good. The guards paused and looked at each other. Actually, the territory doesn't seem to have a lord. Those nearby turned and waited for the rest of the story. The guard had no choice but to say, everything here is done through the village center, saying it is the village system. There were murmurs around, but they were mostly puzzled. Do you believe it? Well, it doesn't matter which one it is, as long as we live well. That's true. Basically, everyone was left to their own thoughts and wonder, with the guards answering endless questions as they traversed the wide avenue. It was around this time that they heard the sound of rolling. It was a little loud, so when it got close, there was a bit of a vibration. Their hearts turned cold, partly thinking they were monsters. However, their worries were soon put to rest, because soon several human-pulled carts and rickshaws appeared. What? Seriously? There were a few people on the carts who stepped out and went to them, directly to the heavily injured ones. These carts immediately took them in, prepared to go somewhere else, likely for treatment. Seeing all these, the newcomers' hearts couldn't help but beat loudly. Obviously, they all arrived here together. Why was the developmental difference so stark? Althea allowed them to absorb the new sight for a few moments before speaking. We are on the trial version now. Only these few are available at the moment. We called them so the injured people could go ahead." The people looked at her in awe. Drake walked to Althea and made the standard salute, rightfully given to an elder, that also solidified Althea's elevated status amongst the newcomers. "We will go ahead to take the injured people to the clinic, located near the main square." He turned to the others. "It is near the village center. You can follow if you want." He turned his concerned gaze back to Althea. "Are you sure you're not coming with us?" he asked, referring to riding the carriages with the heavily injured people. Althea nodded under the people's stares. "I'm planning to introduce some of the territory as we walk," she said. There were too many injured people. She didn't want to take their comfortable space. As such, the most heavily injured people were placed in the carts, with their friends and family walking closely following. Luke said a temporary goodbye to Ansel and his goddess, before leaving to follow the cart where his brother was. Ansel looked at their backs in worry and Althea couldn't help but pat his shoulder. "He'll be fine, we have a healer here." "Healer?" Althea saw him surprised and realized most of the other territories couldn't have upgraded their village centers to level 2, simply because of its cost. It was the Lord's prerogative to upgrade, and she wouldn't be surprised if they ignored it. Speaking of cost, upgrading territories themselves required huge amounts of gold, which made her wonder what happened if the 100 hours leeway was over, but the territory didn't have enough money to upgrade. Would it be in debt? At this point, Althea wasn't wrong. Such territories would indeed fall in debt, and the interest rate was staggering. "Where did healers come from?" Ansel asked. "They're aborigines hired by the territory by special means." Althea answered very vaguely. "From what I heard, it had to do with an upgraded village center," was all she said before walking forward with her brother. Many people looked curiously for her to speak more, but no one dared ask. Who told them to have such a high image of Althea after she rescued them so grandly, and with the guards following her orders so respectfully? Ansel was also very curious, but he didn't ask. They'd have plenty of time to chat later on. The group continued, walking along the avenue with a bit of wonder and extreme curiosity, following its path and not noticing the time. Before they knew it, they were starting to hear some buzzing, and they understood they were getting closer to people. But it's just daybreak, right? The day is just starting. People wake up early to prepare their shops, and some need to buy breakfast before going to hunt or to work. One of the guards explained, a bit proud. "Shops, people prepare shops," the woman asked. "The restaurant and other stores are always open, aren't they?" Another guard butted in with a smug smile. "They are shops owned by the citizens here." The group was taken aback. What could people sell? They knew of stalls as they were available everywhere, but the term used was shops. This time none of the locals spoke. Instead they gave out sly smiles. "You'll find out soon." The crowd was still chattering at this point, but then they all stopped, because they started smelling the amazing aroma food. Their stomachs churned, ordering them to follow the smell or else they'd eat themselves. The pace of walking had visibly hastened, and the newcomers soon arrived at the active commercial streets. Although it wasn't as lively as it was when the stalls were here, it was energetic enough even at this time so early in the morning. A lot of people had to eat breakfast before running to their respective jobs or going outside to hunt monsters, after all. Food. The guards, already used to this, decided to part with them when they reached a large intersection. It was the handsome Helios who gave the instructions. "We will leave you here to explore on your own. Basically, this avenue contains the most important facilities." He then pointed at his left and right. "This is a new street called Market Street, which only takes in foot traffic. If you're on a budget, there are marketplaces at the end of each street, where various stalls are located. As far as I know, the food sold there is much cheaper and simpler than those in the big stores. The marketplace where the stalls, which could be rented on a per-day and per-week basis, were placed right in front of the garden squares of Market Street. This was also to ensure that the majority of traffic would reach the supermarket." He sneaked a peek at Althea, who smiled and nodded. "There is also a supermarket on the end of this street." He pointed along the northeast side. "I heard it's opening later in the day." And finally, he pointed further to the avenue they were walking in. "If you wish to become residents, find a place to live, find a job, etc., do register in the village center at the end of this avenue." He then faced the refugees with a friendly smile, absolutely charming the women. "That's it, welcome to Althea. With this, the guards were done with their jobs and headed to the barracks to report. Of course, the guards all greeted Althea before segregating from the group, offering to escort if she needed. Althea shook her head and told them she'd be spending the morning with her brother. Crow and the others knew Ansel had found his sister, so they didn't stick with him. They simply thanked everyone for their rescue and promised to treat them to food when they earned money. Seeing everyone go their own ways, Althea grabbed Ansel's arm, dazzling him a bit. "So shall we go see the children, Uncle Ansel?" "Altera A," he asked her with an amused tilt in his voice as soon as the others left. "Didn't anyone question how much it sounded like your name?" Althea only blinked at his question, adorably innocent. "I know, what a lovely coincidence. Interestingly, it could also mean higher Alt plus Terra N," she said with a sly smile, obviously using this reason before. Ansel shook his head. She obviously felt quite proud of this explanation, so he just went along with it in the end. The two of them continued to chat as they walked to their destination. It was breezy and fun, and it was like they had never been apart. After passing through the lively green streets and parks, which still hadn't stopped amazing Ansel, the two siblings finally arrived outside the villa. "We're here," she said, looking back at him with a proud smile. He chuckled and turned to look at the tall fence in interest, his eyes brightening up the more he saw. In classic Althea fashion, the entire house was aesthetic and had a lot of plant elements. Although the house itself was a little far from the fences, one could already appreciate the detail to greenery of those who lived behind the walls. The fence was slowly being covered with colorful vines. It effectively lined up the perimeter of her house and set up its approach. He could also see the small trees near the fence, and he bet they would be deciduous trees with wide canopies. If so, then when all these vines and colorful canopies grew, this house would definitely be a head-turner. If such a house was found in Terran, maybe people would be taking pictures outside of it, turning it to a small picture spot. Althea smiled and opened the gate, and Ansel couldn't help but gape as he stepped into it. It was even more beautiful inside. The path was lined with shrubs and trees, swaying with the wind. The gentle breeze carried the delicate scent of flowers. The flowers were arranged into meticulously designed flower beds. The sight of budding shades of crimson, peach, green, and others blended beautifully, and just the view could make anyone feel better. There also were, interestingly, plenty of garden decorations and details. There were ponds and carved arches. There were also play spaces for children, as well as some leisure spots people could hang out in. It was akin to a paradise, especially compared to what they had been seeing since landing here. Along the edges of the gardens was a wooden fence. Crawling on them were not only colorful vines, but also fruit-bearing grapes. Looking beyond the grape fence, he could also see the rest of the property, as the other side was still visible at this point. Ansel could see a lush garden farm on the other side, and even the preliminary sight amazed him. There were a variety, many familiar and mostly unfamiliar, but whatever it was, they were fascinating as they were baffling. In a daze, he began to doubt his memories. Was this the same world? Everyone arrived here at the same time, right, a few weeks ago. Why were other people's lifestyles so different? Others were struggling to keep full, and most people were worried about encountering monsters. But then there were people like Althea, who placed so much effort in lifestyle, probably as soon as they arrived. Nevertheless, he was more happy to know that Althea had been living well. Seeing this definitely made it feel like a weight on his back was lifted by helium balloons, and that was all that mattered. They entered the house, and the people eating breakfast raised their heads, smiling brightly at the sight of her. "Althea, you're back," Sheila said, while Harold immediately stood up to prepare more food. "Have you eaten breakfast?" Althea shook her head and walked to her children in the crib next to the dining table. They were already babbling and extending their cute little hands. Fufi was also very excited to see them, and was wagging his tail and staring at them from the other side of the crib. Harold paused when he noticed someone else was with her. The others followed his line of sight and flinched, startled. The boss brought a man home, and it was an extremely handsome young man. Was he a star, they wondered. Harold was the first to assume a welcoming stance and looked at the young man. "Have you eaten?" Ansel, who was still staring at the complete furniture, politely shook his head. Harold nodded. "Then I will prepare for you too," he said, earning Ansel's thanks. Ansel then followed Althea to the crib, charming eyes meeting the beautiful eyes of the children. They looked back at him with wonder and innocence, and he felt as if their smiles could wipe away all of his worries. He couldn't help but gape and admire, his heart warming and softened to a puddle. "They're your children, all right," he said, and Althea laughed in response. "Garen is also very handsome." Ansel shrugged non-committally, and he just smiled at the children and made funny faces to make them laugh. Althea sent them flying kisses. Although the Barbies didn't look like it, they were newborns after all. She was afraid they were sensitive to the dirt. Similarly, Ansel followed her lead and admired them from afar. "What are their names?" "I had yet to give them one. I was waiting for Garen." "Then what should I call them?" She pointed at the adorable baby boy with bright eyes, continuously splattering babbles. "We call him Meatball because he likes rolling around so much." Then she gestured for the charming baby girl, who was staring at them in curiosity with an adorable toothless smile. "And this one is little Pepper. She's both cute and feisty, you see." Ansel couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Hey, why do I feel they fit them so well?" he cackled, and the children felt his energy and laughed with him. His heart melted again. It was around this time that Harold yelled from the kitchen. "Time to eat," he said, catching the two newcomers' attention. After sending more flying kisses to her Barbies, Althea guided Ansel to a seat. She placed him right next to her, and he couldn't help but look at the rest of the table. The others were already seated, staring at him curiously and nodding at him in welcome. He gulped, feeling a little shy before nodding back and introducing himself. "I'm Ansel. I'm Althea's brother. Nice to meet you." "Hi Tilda, I'm Sheila." "Hello, I'm Eugene," a man said, then pointed at the kids at the table. "That's Theo, Maya, and Horace." "Hello, big brother," the kids, sans the mute Theo, yelled in response. Ansel's lips twitched. So many children and a man with sticks for legs. His sister was really something else. "Harold's the one in the kitchen," Eugene added, and on cue, the man came with trays and Sheila quickly stood up to help him out. Ansel's eyes couldn't help but look to the kitchen. It was only now that Ansel realized that Harold cooked with gas. Gas? How? But he quickly forgot about the issue when his eyes focused on the food being served, slowly entering his sight plate by plate, and making his stomach growl like it hadn't eaten in a decade. The breakfast was a chicken viand, a vegetable side dish, and a cup of rice. This was a normal breakfast back in Terran, but now it felt like he was in heaven. Ansel looked at the food in front of him and was once again in a daze. Althea smiled and patted his shoulder. "Let's eat." Yes," he said, and when the food entered his mouth he almost cried, recalling the torture restaurant food brought them. It was delicious, f*ck, how? But outwardly he just ate in silence, graceful and poised, even if the food in front of him was disappearing within a few blinks. Harold and the others chuckled at this. Safe to say, the new guy really liked the food. The group introduced themselves to each other more thoroughly as they ate, and Ansel took note of their words seriously. After all, he would be part of their team as well. Harold, the old man, was the chef. Cute little Maya was his daughter, who he had late in life. He was also in charge of the overall operations of their restaurant and grocery store. Gia grocery store, Gia supermarket. Garen, Althea. Tusk. Stupid names. Ansi sounded much better, he thought. Anyway, back to the rest of the team. He looked at the other girl, who blushed a bit under his stare. The other girl, Sheila, was a nurse and watched over the pharmacy and the production of medicine according to Althea's formulas. Only now had he realized that the miracle medicines they gave before were her own creation. Because they were so magical, he always thought they were system products. After all, in Terran, no matter how high the efficacy of a medicine was, there was no truly instant effectivity. However, he was quick to regain his calm. This was Althea they were talking about after all. Even if it was at the unfortunate cost of poisoning herself, she always managed to discover something amazing and beyond her time. Wait a minute. He whipped his head to Althea, looking at her worriedly. You didn't poison yourself when you arrived here, did you? Althea looked at the ceiling while the others cackled. Ansel's eyes twitched in response. Seriously? So I'm fine, she said. I have a bit of immunity because of my experience. That's not something to be proud of. Althea shrugged. Anyway, moving on, Sheila was also apparently helping around the clinic as well. Althea mentioned that she was attempting to learn from the healer NPC as well, in hopes of triggering the profession, ideally, as soon as she reached level 10. He had a lot to ask about those professions. It was the first time he heard of it. However, he stopped himself so he could learn more about the others first. Especially that Eugene, the guy without a leg. He was apparently in charge of technological innovations. The dark-skinned man worked with a lot of people, including a few NPCs and engineers, especially an industrial engineer, to bring a lot of modernity to life in just a few days. Next to Althea, this guy also had the bulkiest pockets in the team, because he owned the largest shares for his inventions. Amongst the new teammates, Ansel liked this guy the most. He heard he was currently researching bikes and cotton weaving machines with the help of Althea's database. Most importantly, a few days ago, Eugene had triggered the life occupation of creator, assisting him in the swift understanding of the machines. This meant that he would only create more in the future. As such, there were already prototypes of bikes, and Ansel was planning on coaxing this guy to let him try. The cotton gin and weaving machine, with the help of Brenda, the weapons maker NPC, was already done as well. This knowledge made him breathe fresh air. There should be some bolts of cotton cloth available for mass selling soon. The fact that he didn't have to worry about his change of clothes made him want to cry. Internally, of course. And finally, the children and Fufi were in charge of being cute, and they were truly bundles of joy. They brought smiles wherever they went, and people forgot all the sufferings they had been going through, even if it was only for a moment. Of course, little Maya and Horace contributed with resources they picked up themselves, as they reminded the adults constantly, and Fufi was technically a member of the guard team. They chatted like this for a while, eventually leading to the topic of accommodation. "He will stay with us in our room then," Eugene said, and Ansel nodded. Althea, however, was the type to spoil her brother, and she thought he should really have his own room. She also knew his history. How could he take girls home without his own room? "I'm building another set of farm villas," she said. "I'll take the one right behind us and expand the whole lot." "Will that be okay?" Sheila asked. She knew Althea was not short of money even after all the construction going on, but they set a purchase limit in the name of the territory before. "Publicly, I only own this one farm villa and the commercial space at the intersection," she said with a shrug. "I know for sure Baron on paper owned more properties than I do." "Oh, now that you mention it," Sheila said, nodding, and then they proceeded to plan on the new distribution of rooms. In the end, only Althea, Ansel, and the children would remain in the original house. The rest would transfer to the other house. There would still be dormitories for future core members of their Althean team, but at least the originals, them, would now get their own rooms. Eugene was particularly happy with the future bigger laboratory that could rival Althea's in size. "How nice," the handsome Ansel told them very sincerely. "You guys are amazing." They all blushed and said, No, it is your sister that is amazing." "How did you two find each other?" Harold asked, finding out that hadn't asked this yet. "An unexpected rescue. We literally just chanced upon them," Althea said with a smile, and Sheila clapped her hands. "Well, rest assured your life will only get better from here." Ansel smiled. "Yes, I agree." Speaking of life improvement, Althea remembered something. "Is the opening on track?" she asked, and Sheila flinched, brightening at the recollection. "Oh right, I'm glad you came back on time. You can see the supermarket opening yourself." Althea agreed. She had given the instructions before leaving for the date of opening, regardless of her presence. But now that she was here, of course, she'd watch it. After breakfast and cleaning up the dishes, Sheila and Harold excused themselves. The opening of the supermarket was today, so the adults were definitely going to get very busy with the preparations. The very responsible little Maya was in charge of watching the children so that everyone could do what they had to do on this momentous day. On the other hand, Althea and Ansel set out to clean themselves so they could finally hug the children. They were too cute. How could they not see them extending their little arms for hugs? "Mang Mama," little Pepper mumbled, seeing that their mother's attention was finally back on them. "Gugwim Mama," little Meatballs was not to lose, and some saliva popped as he called onto her. Ansel chuckled. They even have different calls. Althea smiled and fondly watched the uncle-nephew-niece together in one frame. She sighed. It would be perfect if her husband was here as well, then their family would be complete. Anyway, at least there was improvement, she thought optimistically. One down, one more to go. Ansel heaved out a relaxed sigh as he laid on his bathtub filled with warm water, as he submerged his body. It was like all the tiredness and stress of the past few weeks seemed to flow out of his body. "Ah, this is the life," he said, closing his eyes and leaning deeper down until his entire body was covered. His senses were refreshed and all his tense muscles relaxed. Groaning in relaxation, he simmered in the lovely warmth of the water. His body also felt soft. It was as if all the tense muscles were being massaged on their own. Ansel had no doubt that the special jasmine fragrance Althea gave him to mix with the water had a lot to do with this. She had always had a talent for making concoctions like this. For a while he laid there, just feeling the warm water surrounding his body. It was so soothing that he mused that this must be what it was like to return back to the womb of mothers. He emerged a couple of seconds later, literally feeling like a newborn. As he chilled out, he began to observe the bathroom of his new room. It was a 10-square-meter bathroom with the tub he was on at the far edge. It was next to a small capiz-like fenestration that allowed natural lighting in. If he wanted, he could open this window and observe the garden outside as he bathed. Ah, how lovely! He then turned his attention to the tub itself. The bathtub was made of ceramics and intricately designed wood. There were carvings, but the most important feature was their anthropological design. Any body size would be able to lay down and relax their hearts out. It could be said that whoever Althea commissioned items for her house, whether it was wood or earthenware, she took particular care with its quality and design. Of course, due credit shall also be given to the masters who managed to follow her whims. It must not have been easy. Ansel couldn't help chuckling at the image. He was obviously going insane with worry for her, but she was living the life in her new home. He cleaned himself up very thoroughly, and he even fell asleep in the bathtub a few minutes later. Fortunately, the shape of the tub was to prevent people from drowning even while snoozing, so he was still alive and well after the 15-minute power nap. He dipped once more before standing up to get out of the bathtub. His well-built body, further improved by the level upgrades, was completely exposed to the air. He stepped out of the tub and he was soon covered by the cotton towel accessible by an extension of the arm. Drying himself with a towel, definitely from a Terran hotel, he went out of the bathroom and looked around his new room. Immediately, he saw new sets of clothes folded neatly on the bed. It was a polo and pants set made of comfortable linen. He tried it on to find out it was just his size. It was still his favorite brand of comfort clothes. Althea must have gotten these from the downtown trip she took, the one he heard about from the twins. Even if he knew Garen even had more sets of clothing, Ansel felt warm in his heart. After all, even in that situation where zombies were chasing, Althea could still think of them, remembering even the small details. With a smile, he looked at the other things prepared for him. He saw a small jar with a note, saying it was a gel alternative, and his eyes sparkled. How long has it been since he had his lovely gossamer hair? He could live without these chicken nests, thank you very much. Ansel got dressed and arranged his hair with a smile, knowing he looked good by instinct. There was no mirror in his room yet, before finally leaving the room. He went down and found her having tea in the veranda, relaxed in her seat with a leg folded under another, sipping her cup gracefully. She looked as beautiful as ever, having the plants and sun behind her as her background, serving as a willing foil to her beauty. Beside her was a soft mat of beast fur where the 4 children were playing. Horace was out working, with various wooden toys. Of course, the Barbies were rolling around, not at all looking like newborns. Now that he thought about it, are newborn children supposed to be rolling around? And they don't look like newborn premature Barbies at all. Althea smiled and motioned for him to join her, pouring him tea from the quaint earthenware tea set she commissioned. "It's really a long story," she said. "I want to hear what happened to you first." Oh. Ansel took a sip of the tea and was not surprised to find it delicious. It was a lovely mix, having the sweetness of fruit but the refreshing hint of something minty. Although Althea didn't cook, she could really mix fantastic teas. "Well, the transformation happened while I was having dinner with my clients." He began speaking, telling her about his adventures and how he managed to survive. He did not hide anything. Althea was heartbroken and she patted his hand, and seeing her worried look at him, Ansel gave himself a nod. If Garen were to see his pity act, Ansel had no doubt he'd be thrown in the wilds for training. He soon got to his arrival at Bright territory, and Althea looked at him curiously. Bright had nothing on what you have here, but it's better than the others. It was horrible living there, Althea. You probably can't imagine. I have an idea, Althea corrected him. I didn't build the territory from the get-go, and I happen to have encountered one before getting here, she said, her eyes darkening at the memory of the friend they lost. Ansel didn't have the time to ask for details, because she lifted her head with clear eyes, obviously putting the topic aside and putting back her attention to his situation. Tell me more about this Bright and Vismont villages and their lords. Ansel paused before nodding, telling her his impression of the guy. In fairness to him, although I don't like Lord Plasterface, he is still much better than that other lord. He saw Althea pondering about something, but she shook her head when he asked. It's just a preliminary idea for now, she said. I'll tell you more after I flesh it out more. Instead, she looked at him with interest. You seem to really dislike the Vismont village lord. Ansel mumbled about what he knew and experienced. Then he turned to Althea. Tell me honestly, what do you see about us? What? What are lords able to see about the people in their territory? Althea blinked before smiling mysteriously. After a while she still didn't speak, completely whetting Ansel's appetite. I promise not to tell anyone else. Althea did not speak, just raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms. Please, sister, he asked, acting cutely. If Leo and the others were here, they would probably vomit. And if Garen was here, he'd definitely have thrown Ansel into the barracks for a very, very harsh training regime. Althea, on the other hand, was used to him acting like a baby, so she just laughed in amusement instead. She looked at him, face morphing to one of seriousness. Ansel leaned over to listen well. What I can't see are the specialties and occupations the people had back in Terran. For this, I rely on the registration system. Ansel nodded, and then, what about what you can see? He asked with his eyes. Althea's lips held back a smile. We can see the basic information like level, occupation, elements, wealth, and, she paused mysteriously, even loyalty. He gasped, What an intrusive system. That's what I thought as well, but it's been very helpful to me so far, so I have no complaints. Do note that there are still limitations, she told him. From what the NPCs said, loyalty values cannot display a negative value, so you can't use it to determine someone aiming to do harm. Ansel was still simmering, that so much of him was bare for those two jerks to see. TSK, no wonder I felt creepy when those two stared at me. Then he paused and looked at her like the sycophant he could be. Of course, this doesn't apply to you, my kind, beautiful sister. It was here that they heard a bit of mumbling from the children's side, as if alerted by Ansel's noise. They saw one of the Barbies had rolled out of the mat. Meatball really did his nickname justice. Althea then stood up to take the baby boy, who was babbling with drool all over his face. She gently rocked little Meatball in her arms, cleaning up his slobbered face with a clean cloth. Gee-goo-goo-gurgleg, he mumbled, seeming to thank her for her service. She couldn't help but giggle at his cuteness. Silly baby, she said, leaning down to give him a huge peck on his chubby cheeks. He giggled adorably in response. Little Pepper saw this, and she extended her chubby arms to her direction. Ansel saw her hands full and took the baby instead. It was just that Little Pepper being Little Pepper, she refused to behave in the arms of a strange dude. Garen would be so proud. Whamworth. Althea smiled but didn't take her, wanting her to be closer to her relatives. Orwa. Baby, she said, and her heart broke when the little girl's eyes lined with tears. This is your Uncle Ansel, he is family, she said, kissing the girl on the cheek. Don't cry, okay? Ansel looked at the interaction with a smile, deciding to be proactive and gently lulling the baby girl. She didn't look very comfortable at first, but she soon adjusted as she saw her mother nod with a smile as she behaved. Althea grinned warmly as she saw Little Pepper finally snuggle into her uncle's warmth. You should talk to her, she told him. They don't understand what we're talking about, but hearing our voice gives them a sense of security. Oh, he asked, then turned to the baby girl and lifted her in front of him. So, little princess, what do you want to talk about? The baby stared, seemingly pursing her lips, before she began to babble nonsensical syllables. Hey, I wonder what she said. She probably said you're a silly uncle. It wasn't far off. Anyway, the two adults laughed, and Ansel stood up with the baby girl in his arms, heading towards the table. Althea did the same with Meatball. The two then took the Barbies back to the table and sat down, cooing them as they chatted. On the other hand, Maya continued to play with little Theodore, also looking very cute with their own little makeshift world. "What about you?" Ansel asked, and then looked around at the beautiful house, something he really didn't think possible with the current conditions. A lot must have happened, right? Althea chuckled because there was too much that had happened. She started with her adventures within the villa areas, as well as the meeting of Harold and Maya. Ansel couldn't help but tap the table when he heard about the drug lord. "I knew it, I knew that guy was a drug lord, he reeked of it." Althea raised an eyebrow. "You know him?" Ansel nodded as he remembered a memory, looking very dignified as he did so. "You don't know, when I went home late one time, I got a bit lost and ended up on his street. You know what I saw?" He paused for effect, mysterious garbage bags being hauled out of the house, guarded tightly by those men in black with guns. Althea was a bit amused by his gossipy side. "Oh, don't speak too badly of him," she joked. "He shares some of the credit on how I was able to make this place so well." This made Ansel pause. "You really did build this place very well. You're as meticulous as always, especially when I recall how those other territories are." Even if others had money, he strongly doubted those other lords would be able to create a territory with such detail and convenience as Altera. Not even close. Then he looked at her with a puzzled face. "But these should be extremely expensive, right? How did you get so much money?" Then he remembered her mention of the drug lord's contribution. His eyes widened. "I robbed the neighbors and the bank," she said with a shrug. Ansel looked at Althea in awe. This sister was even more badass than he remembered. Character interaction. What if the kids were a little older and could make a commentary? Author, so kids, this happened many years ago when you were Barbies. You probably don't remember, but what do you think of your uncle back then? Little Pepper, so he was still an idiot even back then. Auntie Winona wasn't lying. Little Meatball nods yes, an idiot. Uncle Ansel. Author, that wasn't as enlightening as I thought it would be. The two of Althea and Ansel left for the soon-to-open Gia supermarket, each with a baby on hand. As they walked, Ansel's free hand pushed the empty stroller, in case their arms got tired. Maya and Theodore, of course, also happily joined in the fun. Althea smiled at the two children, giggling, patting Maya's little head with her free hand. "Hold on to Theodore's hand tightly, okay, big sister Maya. We don't want him getting lost in the crowd." Maya bobbled her head cutely, grabbing Theo's hand like the best big sister. Althea chuckled and continued to give them more precautions. There would definitely be a crowd there. She then turned to Horace, who had just appeared after a morning of work, gathering resources to pay his rent, joining them in their excursion. He was a very diligent little kid. "As the oldest boy in your group, you will guard your siblings well, okay?" The little boy adorably straightened up his spine, looking dedicated. "Okay." Horace then took the empty stroller to push, eyes not leaving the other two kids. Satisfied with the arrangement, Althea and Ansel carried the Barbies by hand and continued on their way. Because Harold and the others were already in the supermarket, the group was composed of 2 adults and 5 children. This alone caught a lot of attention. Fortunately, no one was too impolite and stared too long. They simply smiled warmly as they sent subtle stares. Nama, Ansel felt the soft, pudgy little Pepper shift in his arms, and his heart softened into a puddle. She was extending her small hands in Althea's direction, mumbling continuously. Seeing the little girl call on his mom, they decided to exchange Barbies to carry. Little Meatball was startled to suddenly leave the soft arms of his mother to this new guy, staring at him blankly at first as if he didn't know why it happened. It was super adorable. Little Meatball seemed to have noticed his mocking eyes, and he stared accusingly, tears lining up his big eyes. Ansel flinched. "Oh dear me." Ansel was afraid of being framed as a mean boy bullying the weaker kid, something he had done more than once with Garen back when they were children. So he quickly cooed at the little boy, praying he didn't make a scene and ruin his image. He tried gently swinging the boy, then when it wasn't working, hastened his pace, and it just made the little guy's eyes even redder. Seeing that it was useless, he changed his approach and playfully throw him up in the air for a throw-and-catch game. Fortunately, Little Meatball wasn't sent by a mysterious force to take revenge on him for his father, and the kid actually started giggling. Althea smiled, and the other people around also laughed, complimenting him for being a good father. This made him pause. They must look like a family of 4, no, a family of 7 and a dog. Tusk, he should have brought a camera, and then he'd show them to Garen when they finally met, whenever that may be. Since Althea was confident he was here, then Ansel subconsciously believed the same. Now that he thought about it, he didn't even know he had children, did he? "Hey, what are you thinking?" Althea asked, looking back at him and seeing him in a creepy daze. "Let's go." "AR," he said, though internally he was cackling. Finally got to one-up that jerk. The opening of the supermarket would be as grand an event as a Terran store opening would. Well, relatively. After all, there was a decisive lack of the usual party items. There was no more gunpowder, so how could they get fireworks? There was no paper yet, so how could they have confettis? A lot of the other party items were also based on paper. There was also a pointed lack of pigment variety as well, so how many colors could they paint the makeshift banners? All that Harold and Sheila could organize was some manifested gongs by Oslo. They hired some people from the construction team to hit the gong when the opening time came. Speaking of Oslo, that guy was seriously overworked lately. Althea made a mental note to add some special bonuses to particularly contributing NPCs. Should she make an MVP NPC of the month or something? There was also Brenda, who had worked overtime for a few nights with Eugene with the machines for cotton. Rumor had it that her dating life took a toll because of it. At this, her emerald eyes looked among the crowd and saw Brenda with her love life, Troy, next to each other and all shy. They were blushing and giving each other subtle glances, and when their eyes met, they would look away with shy smiles on their faces. Fortunately, whether or not the rumor was true, they seemed fine and happy now. The 7 of them settled somewhere near the stage, waving through the crowd which politely opened to them like a sea parting to make way. After all, who dared block the big boss and her cute Barbies? There were hundreds of people in the area, so it was understandably very crowded and a bit chaotic. There were guards around that kept the peace though, so nothing too serious happened. Anyway, Harold and the others obviously did a good job in marketing. They even saw a number of the newcomers who came with Ansel, though most of them had obviously cleaned up, though their clothing had a lot of holes, like at least half of the population. In particular, there was the trio and their older guardian, who were all chewing on something as they waited excitedly for whatever may come their way. Like them, there were many others who, instead of resting after such a long trip, joined the fun instead. Althea smiled, recalling how they were when she met them. In less than a day, they were already in the mood to join a random event. She shook her head in amusement and turned back her attention to the stage. As an opening program, Harold and the others organized a short show in the park square in front of the supermarket. Even Althea didn't know about the program they prepared, and she was quite excited. She had a feeling it would be quite fun. Chapter 200, Fable. While waiting for it to start, the people bought street foods from the marketplace next door. Combined with the food from people who sold things on foot, everyone had more or less something on their hands to chew before the program even began. Soon, the gong ended, and old Harold went out looking like the amicable old man that he was. "Thank you for coming, everyone," he said, extending his arms in welcome. "Our Gia Food Stores has now officially opened a supermarket. We welcome you to our very own Gia supermarket." Harold smiled and waited for the applause to stop. "This is inseparable from your patronage, so thank you everyone. We promise to offer you a wider variety of products, many of which will surely please you. Perhaps our products may even improve everyone's lives. How you ask, you will see very soon." Harold smiled as everyone cheered and clapped their hands again. There were also some hoots and playful boos, asking him to stop being mysterious already. In response, though, with a mysterious smile, he raised his hand, asking for their silence. "Before we enter, though, we would like to give you a little surprise," he said, stepping down the temporary stage without another word, and everyone just looked at each other in bafflement. For a while there was silence until bangs bangs bang. Bangs dee bang bang bang. Bangs bangs bang. Several men with beatboxes came out, and they artistically, with shaking hips, hit beat after beat to create a background song of sorts. The young women and the girls could feel their hearts thumping at the familiar beat. They used to listen to it back in Terran, and used to dance with it wildly in clubs or in the privacy of their rooms. Could it be? Sure enough, a handsome man with clear eyes and great shape jumped out and stood in the middle of the beatboxers. The women went absolutely insane. Fably. Look here, Fable, RHHH. The singing star happened to be Fable, one of the more famous singers in Eden. As for how he hadn't been drowned by fans after being in the territory after so many days of staying, it was a long story. Fable entered the territory a few days prior, but because he looked absolutely unsightly when he entered, no one recognized him at all. He didn't bother to arrange himself either because, in his last territory, he was almost raped by the female lord. There was also the fact he entered the Eastern Gate, which had very, very few people at the time, so he thought no one actually saw him. Anyway, after entering the safety of the walls, he wasn't able to last long. He fell unconscious somewhere there in hunger. He was found by the soft-hearted Gru, who had been making rounds in the farmlands. Through him, Fable found a place to stay. Through Gru, Fable eventually met Harold. Gru and Harold had become good friends due to their similar interests and age group, and he somehow managed to join in the circle, as if he were their grandson. A few days ago, Harold mentioned his problem with the opening program. Fable, who was extremely grateful to Gru and liked Harold as an elder, volunteered to help them out. He organized the entire program. Anyway, after spending the past few days in the territory, he had come to understand the atmosphere here. Here, he believed he could finally be himself, and he decided to announce his return in the grandest way possible, like the star that he was. He lifted his head and his bangs flew to the back of his head, eyes staring intimately at the crowd, making a couple of hearts stop. I'm here, I am here, I am here / He started singing, moving his body and hips along the beat. He performed his characteristic choreography, and there were even background dancers behind him. Even Althea had to admit this guy was really talented. He had no conventional musical instruments, but he had the crowd at the palm of his hands. Finally, yeah, I have you with me, so dance with me, oh, dance with me. Not far away, the group of NPCs had also joined in the fun. At first, they were flabbergasted by the wild screams, but then the handsome young man started singing and dancing, and they couldn't help but be pulled into the atmosphere. This song is amazing. I don't understand the words, but I feel my body just following the rhythm on its own. Clutch was hilariously moving along with the beat with his stiff body. What novel movements, Brenda added, nodding to the music. Troy, who was beside him, smiled and low-key taught her the moves. One hip left, arm up, then lift your feet. Yeah, like that. It's so interesting, Betty said, looking at the stage with stars in her eyes. It is very attractive. Lenny nodded quietly, looking stiff, but internally she was already making clothes for the young man with uncharacteristically sparkling eyes. At the end of his opening songs, Fable's movements went faster and quicker, raising the energy to an all-time high. He moved so quickly, movements in sync with his background dancers, belting it out at the same time. He even backflipped at the end, earning him boisterous applause, and even the NPCs had joined in. Even Clutch had his hand raised with a lot of the fans, as if waving his hand for Fable to notice him. It was quite funny to look at. Ansel caught all this in his eyes. Since Althea told him of the NPCs and where they were, he had occasionally found his sights on them. He watched their interest and eventual fascination, and then their blending in with the crowd's love for the person performing. His beautifully shaped eyebrows rose in interest, a certain money-making idea brewing inside his head. Should he develop the entertainment industry? Well, he knew that it would definitely be a hit with the Terrans, but it looked like he could make a killing with the Aborigines too. His eyes sparkled, he could already see the gold raking in.